Cincinnati Bengals, because we always go in alphabetical order. And at quarterback, they have Joe Burrow, Brandon Allen. At running back, they have Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine, Travion Williams, and Chris Evans, who they took out of Michigan in the 6th round. Wide receiver Jamar Chase was not taken in the 6th round. He was actually taken the 5th overall. T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Auden Tate, Trent Taylor, and Morgan Stanley Jr. At tight end, they have Drew Sample and C.J. Uzoma. So let's start off with Joe Burrow, because Joe Burrow, as we all know, suffered that gruesome injury in Week 10 last year, tearing his ACL and MCL. But he was QB 15 overall weeks 1 through 10. And he had very limited weapons and a very poor offensive line. The start of the season will be only 9 months from the injury, so he's likely not going to be 100% by then. Right now, there's rumors of him struggling in camp. He's saying that it's more mental than physical, but it's hard to think that he's going to be 100% come kickoff of week 1, don't you think?
Well, most guys take a full calendar year to really get anywhere close to 100%. And this was week, 10 that he got injured during
last gruesome.
Year. Yep. Yeah, and it was not like this minor injury. I mean, we were talking about severe damage to multiple ligaments. I think it was both ACL and MCL. So it would not be a shock, for one, if he maybe didn't even start the first few games. I think he's on pace and on track to. Everything's pointing to that he will. But it's definitely something to think about and consider, that if you have a veteran guy that you feel solid about on your fantasy football team, maybe putting him out there the first couple weeks until we get a good barometer of exactly where Joe Burrow is.
Yeah, he's not going to play in the preseason. So if you're in a super flex league, it would be nice to have a backup plan to Joe Burrow for week 1.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where I feel like, before they shortened the preseason and before players didn't really play much in the preseason starters, I feel like this would have been a nice opportunity for him to maybe get a few snaps behind that number 1 offensive line, but not like week 1 of the preseason, maybe like a couple weeks into the preseason, or in the third week of the preseason, just so he has a little bit of confidence going into the season. But the way they run things nowadays, I think you're probably right. He probably won't end up playing much or at all in the preseason. But it's very hard for me to like that situation. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like he needs to get. It sounds like he needs to get his confidence back, and how you do that is going out and playing. And to be able to do it when it's not live bullets, so to speak, in the preseason, I think would be a nice way to kind of get his confidence and just kind of get him rolling. But if he's not there physically and mentally, there's no sense of putting him out there. He is the franchise, and he's going to be there for a long time.
And it makes me say, like, let's pull the reins back on Jamar Chase a little bit here in 2021 as well, because not only you have Burrow, who hasn't played since week 10 last year, you have Jamar Chase, who hasn't played at all in 2020, sitting out of his last year in college out of LSU. So even though you hear about this rapport they have there at LSU, it's going to be almost 2 years since they really played together. And with Burrow's non-confidence, we're hearing Jamar Chase has a little bit of a struggle getting separation here in camp, which, to be fair, he didn't separate a lot at college either. He dominated the point of the ball.
Yeah. The catch point was where he really dominated. And so it's not a huge shock to me that he's not separating super well, but we saw all these crazy 40 numbers for all the LSU guys, and all of them ran in the 4.3s.
Of course they did.
And we were kind of wondering, like, is that really? And so that tells me that more than likely that he's probably not a true 4.3s guy. He's probably a mid to low 4.4s, which is still plenty fast.
4.6 is fast enough at receiver.
Yeah, as long as you're a good route runner and you can make things happen there. So I'm not surprised he's starting out slow. The time missed. Coming into an offense where it's not the best offensive line. You have a quarterback that's coming off injury. Like, there's just so many different components to this that even though, we had Devonta ahead of him, I still think he's going to be a good player in this league. But I'm still not sure, even, back from when we were watching his tape, I'm not sure that he is going to be Julio Jones, AJ Green, Terrell Owens. Like, I think he'll be a good player.
Right.
But usually if you're drafting a guy top 5 in the NFL draft, you think he's going to be that kind of player.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I don't see that kind of upside with him, but I saw. I can't remember who. It might have been Ray who mentioned Dez Bryant as a similar player.
Sure,
because they weren't big separators and they won at like the catch point, and he was able to be a good fantasy asset for 4 or 5 years, and that is how I see Jamar Chase. I see him probably taking a few years to get settled in, especially considering he missed a full year here in 2020. And, a couple of years from now, I think he's going to be a guy that is making big plays and going up and getting the ball in the end zone and scoring you a lot of fancy points based off of that kind of production. But when you don't have a huge step to lose, once you do start slowing down in your late 20s, it could fall off pretty quick for a guy like this. Just like Dez. Yep.
Yeah, digging into this a little bit more, like you said before, we had Devontae Smith ahead of Jamar Chase. We were one of the very few Dynasty podcasts, few Dynasty sites at all that we consensusly had Devontae Smith ahead of Jamar Chase. A lot of people thought we were crazy. That's where we'll find out. It's a fun thing about playing Dynasties. We find out the truth.
Justin Jefferson had trouble separating last year in camp. We have no idea how this could play out.
Exactly. Yep. So he can still be number one there. From a fantasy aspect, it wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't be blown away if Elijah Moore, a second-round pick, was a better fantasy asset than Jamar Chase over the careers. It wouldn't surprise me if that happened. Because digging this a little bit more, there's the thing when I'm looking here is with the Bengals is, yes, Jamar Chase comes in at number 5. He hasn't played in a year. He's going to struggle a little bit. And I know A.J. Green leaves. He takes 19% of the team's targets with him. But that doesn't even matter because Burrow didn't barely connect with him even when he threw to him, which was weird because Burrow was really accurate. And with his other receivers, he had a 72.8% completion percentage. And when it comes to the Bengals receivers, the Bengals ran an absolute ton of 3 wide receiver sets, about 80% of the time. So this offense can support 3 fantasy wide receivers if Burrow gets going. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, both averaged about 8 targets a game last season. And Higgins is coming off a great rookie year, which he had 67 receptions for 908 yards and 6 touchdowns. And Tyler Boyd produced as well. So much so that Tyler Boyd was wide receiver 13 overall through week 10 when Burrow got hurt. And Higgins himself was wide receiver 23. So when I think about that, obviously Tyler Boyd's going to be a free agent. He's going to move on elsewhere most likely. And when I look at T. Higgins and I look at Jamar Chase, would anybody be here also blown away if T. Higgins ended up being the number 1 fantasy wide receiver on the Cincinnati Bengals for the next couple of years?
For the next couple of years, no. But I think Tyler Boyd signed a deal. He's there till 2023, so he's not.
Oh, he is there. I thought it was next year. So 2023.
2023 is his last year.
Okay.
With their team.
But it's still a team that can support 3 wide receivers for how many wide receiver 3 sets that? Well, to be fair, he might not be the coach after the season.
Yeah, we'll see. Everything could change after this year.
If the offense stays, I do think they're going to be able to support the 3 guys because the tight ends there are almost a non-factor. I mean, sure. CJ Uzomah is probably the best receiving threat there. Drew Sample is a second-round pick that I think is pretty much burned. It's wasted. I don't think he's a guy that can really produce from a fantasy standpoint. So it is the 3 wide receivers. It's the running back. Those are the 4 guys that are going to be getting the ball the most. And I think, Joe Burrow showed in college that he can support that kind of 3 wide receivers easily. He likes to spread the ball around. And this offense, I believe last year showed that they can as well.
Yeah, Tyler Boyd might be one of the best dynasty values out there today. Sure. If you're looking for a solid wide receiver 2, with probably a floor of a wide receiver 3 potentially, Tyler Boyd might be a really good bang for your buck. There's a couple of receivers we're going to talk about because obviously we're talking about the NFC North on the Nerd Herd episode next. Make sure you join the Nerd Herd at dynastynerds.com to catch that episode and all our Dynasty Nerds tools. But this is a player, sometimes you're just looking for value, right? We always talk about everybody in Dynasty is always looking for the big trades, but a lot of times it's the small trades that push you over the edge for a championship in your league.
And Tyler Boyd, I think, fits that perfectly. He's 27 years old, so he's never been this guy that was this wide receiver 1, so he gets overlooked quite a bit, and they're bringing in this young hotness 2 years in a row in T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd just has done nothing but produce at a pretty steady level throughout the last few years. So he's my bold prediction is he's gonna outproduce A.J. Green again, 3rd year in a row.
What a prediction. I don't know. So A.J. Green's reportedly having a really good camp in Arizona. I hear all the time, A.J. Green looks great.
I saw some highlights. There does look to be a little bit of juice left. I'm surprised.
That's all well and good. But when old man Rivers tweaks an ankle and misses.
Wait, Phillip Rivers is back?
Well, you never know. But he's going to be out for 6 games. And then he's going to, struggle to come back because he's 33 or something. He's old,
Yeah. So. He's older.
Yeah. Tyler Boyd, though, good, very good offer, very good value. Really.
All 3 are assets I would consider. There's not many teams that support 3 wide receivers that you say, hey, I want all 3 shares of these guys, but I would want shares of all three of these wide receivers, especially T. Higgins, who I think, in a couple of years from now, we could be looking at a situation possibly like Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb. A situation that can support two high-end wide receivers if Burrow puts it together. And, again, Burrow had over 70% completion percentage when he was targeting any other receivers outside of A.J. Green. And you mentioned Drew Sample is just a guy, and you're right. This offense simply right now, as it is put together, just doesn't target the tight ends. They're not even an option. You might get a game here and there, but if anybody ever gets excited about those games, like Drew Sample saw a spike in production there. Started with the Browns game, actually, when he had a really good game. Anytime you see a spike like that, you just want to sell. Third round pick, second round, anything you can get out of that, it's always a good spike. So all three receivers for Dynasty look high. Who do you think will be the highest scoring fantasy weapon in the Cincinnati receiving corps this year?
I'm going to go with T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins will end up being the guy.
I'm struggling between him and Tyler Boyd because I do think Jamar Chase is going to have a little bit of a slow start. And so I think it's between those two guys in my brain. And T. Higgins, I'll make a consensus because I really liked him going out last year.
And I think he has enough touchdowns, which it always comes down when you're close. Who's going to score more touchdowns? And I would put that on T. Higgins for the year. Now let's move over to the running back here, which is probably the most exciting asset for the 2021 season on the Cincinnati Bengals, whether you're in Superflex or not. And that's Joe Mixon. Why is Joe Mixon so exciting? Because Joe Mixon should absolutely dominate a majority of all the running back touches this season, which should be a ton early, and produces as a high-level fantasy running back one. And when I say early, it's because if Joe Burrow is not going to be 100%, they're going to really rely on that run game.
Right.
And they're already coming out saying, we don't want Joe Mixon to come off the field. We want to utilize him in a passing game. We want to utilize them on the ground. And if you've ever wanted to trade away Mixon, that'll be the time right there. Like week 3 will be prime trade time for Joe Mixon if you ever want to get out. Because you should he has the potential to be running back 1 overall going into week 3. So
absolutely,
you might be able to get super heat for Joe Mixon if that's the time like you ever want to get out for Mixon, right then and there. Because he's coming off a year where he saw his receiving increase a ton, and he was running way more routes a game while also being fed on the ground. So they're going to utilize him in the passing game. They just get rid of Gio Bernard out there. Samaje Perine is not an asset in the passing game. He's a ground pound kind of guy. So Joe Mixon is a running back we should see where I think he was averaging over like 9 targets a game last year when he was in there. So as a PPR 3-down running back, we saw guys like this last year that are just being fed the ball a ton finish at a high level. Guy like David Montgomery, right? David Montgomery finished as running back 4 last year because he was being just fed on the ground and the air. And anytime you have a running back that is in that kind of position, it's going to dominate all the ground touches and air receiving for the running backs, that equals a high-end running back 1. Joe Mixon going into year 2 of his 4-year deal seems like a guy who's ready to finally, you thought was last year, ready to break out in a major way when it comes to fantasy football production.
And he was on pace to do that. He was running back 7 through the games that he was able to play, and then obviously got injured after that. But he was on a really good pace to start the season, and it was really buoyed by those last 2 games where he was being targeted a ton in the passing game, and Gio Bernard just wasn't on the field as much. So this offensive line is slightly improved as well. Jonah Williams is now in his 3rd season, his 2nd one where he's actually playing. He was their best offensive lineman last year. They also brought in Riley Reif from Minnesota. Not a great player by any stretch of the imagination.
Good. He stabilized the position.
Exactly. He's a very stable player. And I expected to still see the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line without, taking Sewell in the first round, be a bottom 3 offensive line according to PFF. They have them as high as 24. Now, I know that's still not high, but that's much higher than I was expecting when past couple of years we've seen them at 30, 31, 32.
Which I still think it was a big mistake of them taking Chase over Sewell, personally.
I do too, but we'll find out. But
we will find out.
As a Joe Mixon truther, I was definitely rooting for the offensive lineman there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Of course. Yeah. And yeah, like you said, Mixon had really high marks there at the beginning of last year. So hopefully that'll continue. Hopefully he's fully healthy. There's no reason to think that he wouldn't be. And with him working behind even slightly improved offensive line, he should be able to sustain some of those nice numbers that they showed late, the last 3 games. He scored 42, 15, and almost 15 in PPR. So those are 3 back-to-back really good games. to kind of hang your hat on from last year.
A difference maker.
Yeah.
A difference maker in a position that you want to have difference makers at. Again, running back ones are the cream of the crop when it comes to fantasy football production. And that's what I expect to have Joe Mixon.
And like you had mentioned, all three of those big games came with an uptick in targets too. So he was averaging like 3 or 4 at the beginning, and then he got 6, 8, and then 3 on the last one again. But it was an uptick in the game that he injured. So it was an uptick in targets that really caused him.
Yeah, I think it was his routes that he was actually running. I was off there when I said about 9. I think it was his actual routes run per game that went up pretty significantly in this offense. And I do expect that to continue as he is, again, there's not much behind him. But Samaje Perine, a very capable backup running back. If you had him last year in your championship game, he gave you over 20 points to help you for that push if you were a Joe Mixon owner. So again, maybe now's not the time to trade for Mixon, I don't think, right now. But again, I don't think there will ever be a time this season to trade for Mixon. But if you ever want to trade him away, this would be the time to trade him away.
And Travion Williams, I mean, he's probably the guy that's going to be that.
Him, Evans, Puka. It's really tough to say at this point.
Yeah, right. Evans has some skills in the pass game as well. So those guys will probably be fighting for scraps behind him as the third and fourth running backs. So nobody of note.
Right, it's not Gio anymore.
Yep.
No, and again, they're going to run 13 personnel most of the time anyway. So it's just it's going to be out there. It's going to be Joe Mixon. They're going to be throwing him the football too. It's just he's going to be down there every down. And Mike Brown's going to get every dollar out of that guy as well because I'm paying this guy a ton of money. You got to get him in there. Cincinnati Bengals.
That's a very good Mike Brown.
A lot. Thank you so much. There's a lot of good dynasty assets in here. All 3 receivers, running back, and quarterback via Superflex. So
very true. Yep.
From that aspect, it's a good team. Now let's move on to the best team in the NFL.
Whoa. We missed Trent Taylor. He's on this team. The guy that I couldn't remember his name.
He's on the Bengals.
I saw him on the way down the depth chart.
I didn't say his name. Auden Tate, Trent Taylor, and Morgan Stanley.
Oh, you did say his name?
Oh,
my bad. We didn't touch on him though.
Right. We needed to break him down. Matt, how do you feel about Trent Taylor?
I can't remember his name, but I liked him a couple years ago.
We don't need to be so touchy-feely on him.
No.
Because it's not really overly promising.